He once stood in the shadows and commanded the light. A man with no powers who moved gods like pieces on a board. Nick Fury wasn't just strategy. He was the secret beneath every victory, the silence behind every war, the mind that made the impossible feel calculated. And in his stillness, the entire Marvel universe found motion. You didn't question his presence. You feared it. You didn't challenge his motives. You trusted them, because every word carried history. Every glance held 10 outcomes, and every step forward was already measured 3 steps back. He wasn't just prepared, he was prophetic. He built a world from whispers, held it together with silence, and vanished into myth with more control than most heroes have with fire in their fists. He wasn't meant to be loud. He was meant to be felt. The gravity in a universe of chaos. And that gravity held everything steady even when the sky was falling. But now, that gravity is gone. That voice has cracked. That myth has been softened. And we are left with a man who no longer knows the room, no longer owns the moment, no longer walks with certainty, only with doubt. And that doubt echoes louder than any villain he ever faced. They turned a titan into a question, a master into a ghost, and somewhere between the dialogue and the dust, we stopped seeing Nick Fury and started watching a stranger stumble through the ruins of his own legend. A legend once built from silence, now buried in confusion. In this video, we're going to explore how Secret Invasion took Marvel's most calculating mastermind and unraveled him into hesitation. We'll break down the choices that broke him, the silence that replaced his strength, and why Nick Fury's fall wasn't just a character shift, it was a legacy lost, and a warning of what happens when storytelling forgets who its legends are. There was a time when his name alone could shift the room, when one glance meant 10 steps ahead, when secrets bent around his will and shadows moved because he commanded them. Nick Fury wasn't a soldier. He was a storm wrapped in silence. We watched him outsmart gods, outmaneuver titans, build the Avengers from fragments of chaos. He was never the strongest, never the loudest, but always the one with the plan, the one who saw the war long before the first shot was fired. He played puppeteer with empires, slipped through power like smoke. His silence was strategy, his fear was fuel, and every move felt earned, deliberate, unstoppable, because that was Nick Fury, the man no one could ever truly read. But when Secret Invasion arrived, something shifted. The silence became stammering. The poise became paranoia. The legend became a question mark wrapped in trembling hands and haunted stares. And suddenly, the man who once held the fate of the world in his palm was fumbling through his own story, unsure, unsteady, unfamiliar, and we couldn't help but ask, what happened to Nick Fury? This wasn't the return of a titan. It was the retreat of a relic. A man swallowed by hesitation, grasping at memories instead of making decisions, broken not by battle, but by narrative neglect. He wasn't outwitting enemies anymore. He was wandering through scenes, reacting instead of orchestrating, questioning his every move while the world around him burned in silence. The fury was gone, the sharp edge dulled. The voice that once cut through gods now trembled in self-doubt, and for all the tension the show promised, it gave us a shell of the man we remembered. Gone was the architect of initiative, replaced by a figure unsure of his place, unsure of his purpose, unsure if he even mattered anymore. And that loss wasn't dramatic, it was directionless. And we kept waiting for the moment he'd snap back, reclaim the room, reclaim the throne. But that moment never came, and each scene felt like a quiet betrayal. Because this wasn't just character change, it was character decay, a slow unraveling of everything that made Nick Fury matter. Not evolution, but erosion. And each frame felt like watching a monument crumble without warning. We watched a man haunted by choices, not learning from them, but drowning in them, retreating into quiet instead of rising through it, forgetting how to fight, not because he aged, but because the story let him fade. And in that fade, something vital disappeared forever. He wasn't feared anymore. He wasn't respected. He was pitied. And that pity ached deeper than any wound, because it wasn't earned through vulnerability. It was forced through weakness. And that weakness rang hollow in the shadow of who he once was. We saw the pain in his eyes, but no catharsis. We saw the weight on his back, but no breakthrough. We saw the ghost, but never the man returning from death. And that emptiness left us mourning a legend still breathing. And that absence hurt, not because we wanted the old Fury back, but because we were given a stranger wearing his face, whispering his lines, without any of the fire behind them. And the silence between each word was louder than anything he said. What made Nick Fury special was never brute strength. It was control, composure, calculation. He was the calm in the chaos, the voice in the storm, the one who moved pieces before the board was even built. And that made him more than a man. It made him inevitable. He could break a god without lifting a hand, reveal truth with a single stare, command loyalty not through fear, but through presence. A presence forged from pain and polished into steel. And that steel held the Marvel Universe together in its darkest moments. When he stood in a room, everyone listened. Not because he demanded it, but because he didn't have to. His silence was louder than most men's screams. His decisions were felt before they were spoken, and that silence spoke volumes the series forgot how to write. Every move felt measured. Every line felt laced with depth, with foresight, with history. He wasn't just a man in the shadows. He was the reason shadows existed at all, and every whisper of his past shaped the futures of giants. And that legacy, that power, wasn't just rare, it was mythic, which made watching it unravel not only confusing, but heartbreaking. Like watching the stars dim one by one, until all that remained was the echo of who he used to be. But maybe buried beneath the ruins, there's still something left. Not the Nick Fury we remember, but the one he could still become. Not a ghost of greatness, but a man who learns how to rise again. Because legends don't disappear. They reignite when the world least expects it. Maybe brokenness doesn't have to mean failure. Maybe cracks are the beginning of something new, something raw, something human. Because even legends are allowed to bleed, and sometimes that bleeding leads to something real. He fell, yes, but falling isn't the end. It's the space before the next step. And somewhere in that silence, the real Nick Fury might still be listening, waiting to rise when the world needs him most. And when he does, it won't be as a myth, but as a man reborn. The ashes don't erase the fire. They remind us where it burned. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the finale, but the fracture before the rebirth. And in that fracture, there is still a chance to rebuild something stronger. Because hope doesn't come from perfection. It comes from those willing to rebuild, even when the world no longer believes they can. And Nick Fury, despite it all, still has the blueprint for something greater. Secret Invasion didn't just weaken Nick Fury. It unmade him, rewrote him without reverence, drained him of the fear he once commanded, and replaced him with doubt that never found resolution. And in that doubt, we lost the soul of something once unshakable. The mastermind became a mystery to himself. The leader became a bystander. The icon became a shadow. And all we could do was watch as the fire slowly faded behind tired eyes. And in that fading, the silence grew deafening. It wasn't the plot that broke him. It was the loss of purpose, the loss of voice, the quiet surrender written into every word, every glance, every breath that felt too late. And that surrender rewrote the story without ever asking if it should. He deserved a descent with weight, with truth, with clarity. Instead, he was left stranded in a story that forgot what made him powerful, what made him necessary. And that forgetting became the cruelest twist of all. And that's the real tragedy. Not that Nick Fury changed, but that he was forgotten by the very world he helped build. And in forgetting him, Marvel dimmed one of its brightest minds forever, leaving behind only fragments where a force once stood.